The rivalry is back on.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Cody Felger podcast, and Derek Larger joins me again. Derek, the Colts are now starting preseason game number 3, and it's interesting because they are following the league-wide trend of sitting their starting units for the majority of the preseason, and they're not going to play their starting units for this game, which is intriguing because the last couple of years that's what the Colts had done in the third preseason game. But they host the Bears on August 24th, this Saturday at 7 p.m., which means a few things. It means that we're not going to see, obviously, probably not Jacoby Brissett or any of the starters. And we're also going to see a lot more snaps for some of those backup guys and some of those back-end guys trying to make this Colts final 53-man roster. And so with that, Derek, I thought that we could start here first by kind of talking about, okay, so who are some of these players that we're really going to watch today? And then we're coming at you on Thursday, and we're here with a game preview for you guys. I know it's not the most exciting game of the season. Obviously, preseason can be a snooze fest sometimes, but we're here today because this is going to be really intriguing for the back end of this roster. And so with that, Derek, we're going to talk about some guys who we're really watching to see how they do. And we've, obviously we dropped a podcast earlier this week talking about some guys who have flown and flopped so far. But they still have 2 more weeks before the Colts head out to Los Angeles to play the Chargers for week 1. So, Derek, who are some players that you are going to watch? And by the way, before we get to this, I just have to give a shout out to Derek and to Andrew last week for really just stepping in and having that game preview for you guys for week 2, because I was on vacation all of last week, like Derek had mentioned, and I was actually down in Venice, Louisiana. And if nobody knows where that is, it's basically in the middle of nowhere. So I had really no service at all. I was actually back in the bayou, fishing, hunting, seeing some gators. That was fun. And we caught some redfish, and it was a really good time. I definitely got sunburned because I am white as all get out. No matter how much sunscreen I apply, I'm definitely always going to burn. So, but much appreciated to Derek and Andrew for stepping in there. Okay, Derek, so who are some players that you're watching here in the Colts' third preseason game of the season?
Hey, what's up, Colts Nation? Yeah, it's your boy Derek here again. Thanks again, Cody, for that. Andrew and I were definitely having a good time, doing all this, preparing this for you guys. Like I've been saying on Twitter and everything recently, we do this for you guys. We try to make this fun, and obviously we enjoy talking about the Colts every week, especially now that the season is getting so close. But yeah, to your topic of conversation here, the 3 players that I'm most interested to kind of take a look at here this week, especially, are 2 guys that we all know familiarly well. And the guy I'm going to talk about first is actually somebody we just brought onto the team less than a week ago, and that is Charcandrick West. And that is right, another former Kansas City Chiefs running back being brought onto the scene for the Colts to prove what he's got. And I got to tell you, I'm kind of impressed with this pickup. Charcandrick has never really been a number 1 guy anytime in his career, but he's played in 52 games. He's averaged 13 games a year. I mean, this guy is practically healthy most of the time. He's had almost 1,000 yards in his short career that he's played, and he's got a couple touchdowns to go along with it. He's averaging close to 4 yards a game, or for 4 yards an attempt, I should say. It's just one of those guys that we did release James Williams, and that's a running back that we're going to be thinking about. Obviously, Spencer Ware's on the IR, so we're going to have to deal with that. But Charcandrick is another one of those guys, that one of those other multi-purpose backs that you could bring in. Could be another third down guy that they look for, because, obviously you'll have Marlon Mack and you'll have Nyheim Hines, but they're still trying to look for that bona fide number 3 guy to help fill this roster spot. And I think Charcandrick's a really good player. I really think he is. I never thought he was a over-the-top talent to me, but he was always a reliable guy. He's always in there. He's never really injured from what I've seen. And again, with this Colts offensive line improving the way it is, if it's anything like what we had last year, then, I mean, Charcandrick can definitely do a lot of good things. And we were talking about it just before we started this, how this Colts team has definitely done a good job of developing some of these players, some players that, don't always perform amazing and other teams can definitely do a lot better in this system because of the way it runs, because it goes through Andrew Luck and a passive read option kind of offense. So I think Charcandrick is a guy that I really am interested to see. I want to see how much playing time he gets. Like Cody said earlier, most of these starters are not going to play. Whether or not Brissett plays or not, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if he does play somehow. He won't play many. He won't play probably one possession, and that's probably it. That's what I'm guessing. But either way, yeah, I really want to see if Charcandrick gets out there and is able to run a little bit. I want to see what he can do. And the second guy that we actually had in the podcast earlier this week, we were talking about guys who are flying so far this offseason. It's a guy that performed very, very well last preseason game, and that is Deon Cain. I want to see more of him again. I want to see what the Colts do with him to get him involved again in week 3, because we saw what he did in week 2. He had 7 catches for 80 yards, and he just looked phenomenal. He looked like he had his step back. He looked like he was out there just catching everything. And he looked like he really had a good feel for the game. Now, he's had a great week. I want to see where he goes from here. I want to see, does he regress? Does he get better? Does he stay the same? That's ultimately why I'm staying with Cain there. And another guy that I want to look at is Rock Ya-Sin. I didn't see much of him last week. I know that they haven't really had him out there a lot. I know that's kind of the thing. And I know with it being the starters sitting most of the time, I don't expect to see much out of Rock Ya-Sin, but you do want to kind of take a look at him early. I want to see what he can do in the first couple possessions of the game, see what he can do to disrupt some of these routes, because when we're starting these games, we're definitely starting off slow, especially on the defensive end. I want to see the overall pass coverage get tighter when it comes to the beginning part of these games. And if Rock Ya-Sin can start showing that physical nature, I think he could be a key component to that. So the 3 players I'm looking at, Charcandrick West, Deon Cain, and Rock Ya-Sin.
Wow, Derek, I'm actually surprised you didn't choose Swag Kelly. I'm proud of you. All right, so for my 3, I kind of noticed something, Derek, when you were talking. You kind of had, for your first guy, you kind of had a guy who was brought in from free agency. The second guy, you had a receiver who is very talented physically, and also who, got injured, has been injured. And then for the final guy, you had a high draft pick. And so I'm kind of going to go along that same format. I'm going to start with the guy who was brought in free agency, and that's Jalen Collins. And Jalen Collins has been he was a very interesting signing last year. The Colts signed him near the end of the season. He was a former second-rounder of the Atlanta Falcons. He actually got suspended for 10 games, I believe, last year for PEDs. And so he's very talented. He actually started on that Falcons Super Bowl team when they played the Patriots. But Jalen Collins has been interesting to me because he has really had an up and down first 2 games. I mean, I thought all in all in his first game he played pretty well, all things considered. I think he forced a fumble, and I've heard he's had a rough camp. It seems like about every post you see when the Colts offense scores, it's against Jalen Collins, against number 32. But, the second game he got beat for a touchdown, did not have a good game. I think, honestly, with how poor he's played, he's kind of pushed himself off of this roster competition at all. And, in fact, the Colts released their depth chart for week 3, and I thought it was really interesting and really telling that Jalen Collins on the depth chart is behind a guy like Shaquille Taylor. I don't even really know who that is. He must be having a strong camp, or maybe Jalen Collins is just not playing well, and it's just really showing. But I think that's kind of telling, Derek, of where Jalen Collins is right now on the Colts depth chart. And it'll be interesting to me now to see, how does he finish off the last 2 games? Does he put himself back into that competition for that final roster spot at the cornerback position? Because I think he's done himself no favors at all. And maybe now with the starters not playing, he'll get more time to get out there and get more experience and hopefully play better, because it's been a rough go for Jalen Collins. Okay, so the next guy on my list I have is Krishan Hogan. And I am a big Krishan Hogan guy. I really like Krishan Hogan a lot, and I think the Colts really like Krishan Hogan a lot. So if you don't know a lot about Krishan Hogan, he was signed in 2017. He's actually a local kid from the Warren Central High. He was actually from Warren Central High School. He was a stud at Marian University. He actually, this is a very interesting tidbit, He was established a school record in receiving yards. He had 4,935 yards and 42 receiving touchdowns. He was actually ranked 7th all-time in NAIA history with 263 career receptions. And so he went undrafted. He was signed initially out of college by the Cardinals, who released him. And then he was signed to the Colts practice squad 2 days later. And he was actually, about a couple days later, he was signed to the active roster. But unfortunately, in that game against the 49ers in Week 5, he suffered a season-ending knee injury. And that's kind of been the story of Hogan so far. Last year, he also went down with an injury, which stinks. And actually, he was signed to the Colts practice squad then in 2017, October 19th. But he's had a pretty impressive camp, and I thought he had a pretty impressive second preseason game. A little bit about Hogan that you may not know. He's a big guy. He's a big player. I believe he's 6'5", so he's a pretty big player overall for a receiver. No, he's 6'3", 6'3", 217. And we were talking about this off air, Derek and I were, about how, with the injury, unfortunately, to Reese Fountain last week, this kind of opens the door for a guy like Krishan Hogan, who has suffered with some injuries, like we mentioned, but it's a very talented guy, and I think, when he's been healthy, he's been a very effective player. And I wanted to read something really fast. Let me pull it up really fast here. About Frank Reich was just raving about Krishan Hogan the other day. Here we go. This is Frank Reich. He said, Krishan has done very well, very consistent. He's very smart, really good hands, makes all the tough catches, and has been productive. And so Frank Reich says, so he's been doing everything he needs to make himself relevant in this competition. And it's intriguing to me because I think at the very least the Colts want him on their practice squad. But with the injury to Reese, I think this really opens a door for him to continue to fight for that final roster spot for the Colts receivers. And I know the Colts have talked about potentially 6 receivers, that is, on the final 53-man roster. I'm more inclined to think they'll keep 5, but you never know. If they keep 6, Krishan Hogan could find himself on this roster. And right now I think he's really competing with Marcus Johnson and also with, I lost his name, with Zach Pascal as well for that final spot. And so I'm looking to see what Hogan can continue to do, and knock on wood that he stays healthy, but we'll see. And I'm intrigued by Hogan. He's probably one of my most intriguing players. And then the final guy on my list is, you talked about Rocky Ya-Sin, a high draft pick this year by the Colts. Let's talk about another guy who's drafted pretty high by the Colts, not by Chris Ballard, but by the former GM who will stay unnamed. LaRaven Clark. And LaRaven Clark's been intriguing to me because since he first came into the league, I've always been intrigued by Clark's size and overall just how athletically gifted he is. He's 6'5", 311, so he's got the prototypical height and size for an NFL tackle, but he's just really been up and down a lot. And he came out of Texas Tech, 3rd round, 2017, the same draft as Ryan Kelly. And he just has not put it together. I think last year I was pretty impressed by Clark when I wasn't overly impressed, but I thought he did a pretty decent job holding his own when Costanzo went down at the beginning of the year. I could definitely see a drop-off in the run game, but I thought all in all, in fact, in terms of the pass protection, I thought he was pretty solid. But he's struggled so far in the preseason. We've talked about it in our first couple games. He's struggled. He's really not done, I think, what we hoped he would. He hasn't progressed the way that we hoped he would, and that really is unfortunate to see from a guy like Clark, who the Colts were really high on. I remember earlier in the offseason, they were really talking up LaRaven Clark. And by the way, I think I made a mistake. It was a 2016 draft when they drafted him, and they drafted Ryan Kelly. I think I said 2015. It was 2016. LaRaven Clark, he's still a pretty young guy, I would say. I believe he's 26, so he's still got a couple years left till he's 30, till he's on the wrong side of 30. So I'm just intrigued to see Derek. We've talked about this. We've touched on this a lot. I don't want to keep hammering this home, but it's crucial. And I think it's honestly could be potentially the Colts' Achilles heel is that backup left tackle position. Obviously Anthony Costanzo has been an Iron Man for the Colts. He's been an Iron Man for the Colts, until last season when he went down. But what happens now with Costanzo on the wrong side of 30 if he goes down again? Do you trust a guy like Clark to step in there? So I'm looking for LaRaven Clark to hopefully step up his game and really show the Colts that he can be the backup left tackle for Costanzo and maybe earn another contract with this team, because I just haven't really seen it from him so far. But here's to hoping the last 2 games he really steps it up. So those are my couple guys. So the next thing we wanted to talk about, and Derek really wants to talk about this, it was a tweet from Zach Kiefer that we saw about Frank Reich talking about the status of Jacoby Brissett. So Derek, take it away.
That's right, Cody. So we all know the news that, Frank Reich has kind of mentioned that the ones are going to receive very little play time, whether or not anything at all. So again, I know another preseason game that, you won't get to see a lot of the ones, but don't worry, Colts fans, we are going to probably see a little bit more of them in game 4, given the fact that it'll be the last preseason game and they'll want to kind of get back up to game speed and ready to go, get some contact in before week 1, obviously. And just a quick side note before that, if anyone is not following the fact that there are many injuries / holdouts going on with the Chargers right now, the Colts have a lot better chance to win that game now than what they did literally 2 weeks ago. So that's one thing. But on to what Zach was saying. Yeah, Zach Kiefer ended up stating that Colts coach Frank Reich isn't willing to reveal if quarterback Jacoby Brissett will play in Saturday's 3rd preseason game. He spotted him quoting saying, "You won't see a lot of the ones," he says. So whether or not you want to take this as a sign that Jacoby Brissett is going to be a number 1, or whether or not this is a sign that Jacoby Brissett isn't truly a 1 and that Andrew Luck is actually there and ready to, and he most likely will be ready to go. Because remember, we're going to find out by Monday whether or not Andrew Luck is going to start week 1, because the Colts have put that as a personal time down as to whether or not they want to make sure he's ready to go for week 1. I think this is just another one of those things where it's Jacoby Brissett, I mentioned it in the podcast earlier this week. I don't think Jacoby Brissett's going to start because I think Andrew Luck's going to be back. And I think this is just a way of Jacoby's going to get a few possessions out there, kind of like what he did in week 2, get about 2 drives or something just to get the ball throwing a little bit. And then that's all you're going to see of him. I think that's ultimately what's going to happen. But I guess we'll have to see Saturday, because ultimately, if Jacoby Brissett doesn't play, that would be very interesting. I don't think that Frank Reich is going to take him out, because I think he wants Jacoby Brissett to get all the time that he can get, just in case something does happen to Andrew. But if he does play, I again think that he'll probably get 2 drives, and that's all you're going to get out of him.
Yeah, to me, this communicates something, Derek. And I could be completely off base on this, but to me it communicates, I think if Jacoby Brissett's not out there, like you mentioned, Brissett obviously needs to get all the snaps he can get right now if Andrew Luck does not play week 1 and Brissett is forced into action. But to me this communicates that if Jacoby Brissett's not out there, I don't think that the Colts are as worried about Andrew Luck's status for week 1 as maybe some of the fans are and maybe some people are in the national media, because, obviously you want Jacoby Brissett to get as many snaps out there, especially if he's going to get thrown out there against Joey Bosa and Melvin Ingram and some of those players. So to me that communicates that maybe Andrew Luck's a little bit closer than we think he is. So to wrap this podcast up, I thought it would be a good idea to do our predictions for, obviously this final score doesn't matter, so who the heck cares, but we'll do our game MVPs for offense and defense. So Derek, we're going to switch it up. We're going to start with defense. Who is your defensive prediction for the MVP of this game and why?
All right, so the person that I think is going to get most valuable player on the defensive side of it all, I think This comes to mind, there's two guys that really come to mind for me. It's Ben Banigou and Quincy Wilson. I think that Quincy had a slightly downloaded game last year, but week, I apologize. But I think this time around, I think he's going to want to go out there. And even though he's pretty much on the roster at this point, we all kind of agree on that. I think he kind of wants to rebound from last week. I think he had a few mishaps in the coverage, and I think he's going to try and go out there and be a little bit more complete. And I think Benigou is going to go out there and possibly get a sack or two as well out there. And I really hope that he definitely does. I want to see more of him. I want to see more of what he can do. So those are the two guys that come to mind for me. But I think Quincy Wilson will be my MVP for the defensive side of the ball. So Cody, who is yours?
Yeah, and I feel like we can't go a podcast without mentioning EJ Speed's name. So I'm going to go with EJ Speed. I'm going to cop out. It's fine. Everybody hates me. It's all right. I'm used to it. No, but I'm definitely going to go EJ Speed because I think similar to your point about Quincy, I think EJ Speed kind of had a rough game last week. I wouldn't say it was terrible, but I wouldn't say it was his best performance either. And we saw him have a really good performance the first week against the Bills, and so I think that he's going to rebound. I think he's got the athletic ability, and I think he's a high-character guy. It seems like most of the guys the Colts bring in are pretty high-character guys, at least the guys that they draft. And so I definitely think that EJ Speed's going to be my guy, especially getting more snaps now. I think he'll play a good majority of this game. And so I would say EJ Speed's my guy because I think he's got everything that he needs athletically to be a very solid linebacker in this league and potentially maybe, who knows, be a starter down the road. So EJ Speed is going to be my guy on defense who I think is going to rebound and also who I think is going to be the MVP. I think he's going to lead the Colts in tackles this week against the Bears. Okay, and so we'll go next to the offensive guy, and I'll start with my offensive guy that I'm going to go, and I'm a little upset with you, Derek, because you took my guy. You took my preseason MVP, but it's okay. I'll forgive you probably like next year or something. So my guy, all jokes aside, my guy, I think I'm going to kind of do a combination like you did. Since you cheated the first time on defense, I'm going to cheat on offense. And I'm going to go with two guys. They're both receivers for the Colts. I'm going to first go with Deon Cain, who's a guy that you mentioned for all those reasons. I think he had a very solid performance. I think he's going to build on that. And I think he's going to continue to dominate, especially against the Bears twos. And another guy that I'm really intrigued to watch is another guy that I already mentioned before in Krishan Hogan, who really needs to have, I think, a good couple games here and a good couple practices to potentially make this final 53-man roster. So I think he's going to continue to do that. I think Deon Cain's going to continue to build off of his really strong performance last week. So those are my two guys. Derek, who is your offensive MVP for this game against the Bears? And why?
Yeah, so my guy, and I'm going to steal him because we all know how much you love him, and that is going to be Hentges. And I think that given what we saw from him last week, we saw multiple different times Chad Kelly hook up with Hentges so many times across the middle of the field. I think that the Colts now trying to dissect who they want that final roster to be for the tight ends, given the fact that this tight end group is probably the best tight end group in all of football, I think Hentges is definitely looking that part because even Frank Reich has so much praise for this kid. Even Jack Doyle keeps saying how much better Hentges is than him right now. You know, obviously joking all aside, but I think he's so good because he's just always open in the middle of the field. He's a great route runner. He's a good blocker. I really want to see him in here. And we obviously know the Colts love their tight ends. And if Hentges does make this roster, it will continue the tradition of, I don't know how many years it goes back. I think it's like 20-something years that the Colts have had an undrafted free agent tight end on the roster. So I really want to see Hentges have a really good game because I really like him and I think he deserves a spot on this roster behind Mo Alley Cox. And that's who I think is going to be my MVP for the offense this game.
Yeah, I just checked the facts on that. You were right. 20 years the Colts have had an undrafted free agent make their final 53-man roster. That's crazy. That's absolutely wild. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to watch this game. Again, if you don't know when the game is, this Saturday at 7, the Colts host the Bears. And we'll definitely come at you probably Sunday or Monday with a post-game recap and our thoughts on that. So be sure to tune in there. Thank you guys, and go Colts.